Good morning. Hello, everyone, to my CE375 class in ArcGIS and GIS applications in engineering. In this class, we talk about the GIS science, and today we will start a really nice class or a really nice topic talking about spatial data models. What are the different spatial data models, and how do we start working on these databases that has some spatial aspects in it? So let's start. Let's go ahead and start. So what's the meaning of data models? Data models is simply that we have maps that we want to create and include some data that has some spatial or some coordinate aspect to it, and we want to represent this into a map. So the data models answer this question: how do we store the geographic information systems? How do these GIS systems store? And also what we call here query. Query is asking a question to this software and it will give you an answer. For example, what is the highest population in West Virginia? Which city? That's a question. A map can give us that. A database can give us that. And also, how can we relate attribute data to these data structures? So how can we relate? This is the relationship. This query is the relationship, meaning that, let's give you another example. Different states and the number of people in every state, or the weather in different state, or how much snow each state gets every year. How can we relate this attribute data? Attribute data, again, it's non-spatial or aspatial data to these data structure. Here we use what we call here database. And today's class, we're going to talk about how can we create these models that will relate these two together in terms of database. We're going to learn how does it work, what are the different ways we do it. So the GIS data models is, why do we call it a model? Every model, and we're talking here statistical models, mathematical models. When you go to the toy store and buy a car model, any model is an abstraction or a trying to mimic or some mimication of the real life thing. Similar to that we have in GIS. What's GIS doing? We have the earth, which is the real thing, and we want to find what we call here an abstraction. Let me put here my pointer, so my pen here. So here we want to find an abstraction of the real world or the process or phenomenon. We give an abstraction to it. What do you mean by that? I'm going to show you in the picture in a second now. So a data model is a set of constructs some rules for describing or representing the real world within a computer. We want to put the real world in a computer. Just open Google Earth. That's the real world, the Earth, the globe. We want to represent this in a model. And that's the meaning of the word model. So it's data that we want to represent and show it to the user in terms of a map that tries to mimic or abstract or represent the real world. So in this picture here, let's imagine this is the reality. You have here a piece of land that has some houses, some factories, some farms, and trees as well. And that's the reality. And we want to find models that will try to represent, and definitely it's abstract. We cannot do anything in the world. Imagine you want to draw every single thing in the world. It's very hard, very, very hard. We try to find abstract depending on the use you want to do for. For example, you want to guide a person in his GPS from one place to another. So you care about the roads. You care about the locations, points of interest when you have in your GPS. So we represent it by means of some kind of models. The first model are streets. So it's a layer with some lines in it and points that represents what we call here streets. So you can see here, guys, it's an abstraction. So that's the streets. Another layer or another abstraction or another model is whatever human people do in this land. Buildings. It can be houses, can be farms, can be factories, can be residential areas, it can be offices, whatever buildings you can have. Finally, let's say that you're selling something, you want to know where the customers are. So here you define the people or customers where in the map as also a data model you represent? Yeah, we have here Beckley that has 20,000 people, Charleston 50,000 people. So this is another representation spatially and also aspatially in your map. Maybe we have here some people in zoology or who care about the life habitat or the trees. So you can see here that there's some green areas. So we might have another layer here or another model that has all the green areas and trees. We abstract this by some kind of a model. This is what meaning of the word model. And like we talked about in our labs, in our computer labs using ArcGIS, we had two types of models, vector and raster. We're going to talk very briefly about them, but more we're going to talk about how we represent this in files or a file. And later on we're gonna specify each one of them and how create now models of lines, points and parcels or polygons. That's vector. And then how do we do the raster? The raster is pretty cool because it's very similar to something that we do a lot in our people who like computer, who like Photoshop. Photoshop's kind of a raster thing. We're gonna talk about this in detail once we get there. So we do something called abstract. Another word for it is conceptualization. We try to find concepts. As I told you, for example, here for street data, it's points and lines. So here we're going to view the world as a set of layers. And here comes the word thematic layers. And we did that in one of the labs, and we can keep doing this in labs. If you remember the left side of the window of any ArcGIS, you're going to find here a table of contents which has these kind of layers. You are free to put whatever layers above each other depending on what you want to map. And every ArcGIS map or ArcGIS lab has work on these kind of layers. Later on, I'm going to learn how to create these layers, how to develop layers, how to edit layers. And this is what we call here thematic layers. So thematic layers are defined here by data layers. We put them, I like to put them in this kind of a cylindrical shape because this will give us an idea later on how to understand the word geodatabase, which in any software is defined by this kind of cylinder. So you can see here data layers. We have here the street, the buildings, the vegetation like we had in the previous slide. If we put them all together and look as if they are on a transparent sheets and you look at them all together, it's going to give you some kind of a conceptualization or an abstract to the real thing that you want to map. So here layers organize spatial and attribute data for objects. We have it in layers and we combine them to create new layers. We can combine both, for example, data layers of the street. This one here, let me get back here. So here in the street and the buildings, we can combine them and do some spatial analysis to figure out, for example, for a pizza place, how can I get the fastest route to deliver my pizza. So I can create, based on these two, another layer here that has the fastest route, just the fastest route. So we can create here, combine two layers together, one has the origin destination, the other has the streets, to create, like we did in our transportation classes, how can we create another layer that will tell me where is the fastest route for the delivery guy to deliver from this house to that house. How is done? By these two layers together. So we can do tons of things. For example, also again in this example here, when we have the street data and we have the vegetation, and we want to build a new highway and want to know how much it will affect your wetlands, for example. So you can create here another new map that gives you some kind of the hotspots for vegetation. We can do tons of examples in GIS, how to create different data from original data. So, definition here, the data models. GIS data represents simplified view of actual physical entities. And the word here, entity, we're going to give some definitions here. And in every chapter, this is chapter 5, by the way, in our textbook. Every chapter has just a list of new terms and terminologies that are used within the chapter. So if you don't understand, just go back to the end of the chapter. You're going to find terminology of the word entity, the word geospatial, the word geodatabase, the word geo, and different terms. We're going to go into this presentation. I'm going to explain it as much as I can, but also you're going to find an explanation inside your textbook. So an entity is represented by spatial features. So here I have the word entity and the word feature. So the entity here is the real thing. That's an entity. And it's represented by what we call here, this is a feature, this red thing that I drew myself, or I had it as data. This is called a spatial feature. The word also cartographic. Cartographic means that it's like an art thing. You draw something. Here, if you look at this picture here, you're going to find that I created an cartographic representations as polygons of every house and factory and warehouse in this picture here in GIS. So here we represent it by some kind of a feature. A feature is something, this abstract thing that's created in ArcGIS, and we're going to learn how we create different features in different ways. How do you do it in ArcGIS as a cartographic object? So data models, this is just like some kind of a revision of what we said here. GIS is an abstraction of reality. Definitely, we have to abstract the reality. We cannot represent every single thing. A perfect copy of reality cannot be recreated in the computer. We cannot do exactly everything. We have a saying in transportation, for example, there is no perfect model. No perfect model. Always a model has some problems. And not problems, it has some shortcomings. And this is one thing here. We cannot represent everything. We create models, set of constructs for describing and representing select aspects of the real world in a computer. We try to figure out what I want to do. What is my function here? So this model is answering this question, what I need to represent in a road or in a city or in a country. I cannot just draw every single thing there. So models are composed of a mix of raster, vector, and attribute data. We're going to be doing a lot of these. Raster, we talked about raster briefly last week, but we're going to do detail next week about raster. Also vector today, and we connect with another thing we're going to talk about today, and we did in our lab, attribute data, which are non-spatial data that are connected to our spatial data. The model is tailored to a specific function. So here, there's different functions. We're going to do these functions together in this class, and the model is a function of how to represent the actual thing or the actual Earth. So data models, they define how real-world spatial features are represented in your computer in ArcGIS. We talked about this, but let's now put them into context here. We have two types of models for data structures. We have Mr. Vector, and vector here consists of three different types of representation models: points, lines, and polygons. They all come down to something called nodes, vertices, which have XY information, meaning that a point is a point that has some kind of coordinates. Might be XY, it might be a different way of coordinates. And we define every line has a start and end. We call these nodes. If the line is straight, then these 2 points are good, more than enough. If it's a man-made thing, then this is the line. And we call it a segment as well. We call it a line segment. But if the line changes direction, we want to give it some kind of a shape. And here we're moving from point to a line. Then we add vertices, smaller points that just are used to change the direction and give your line a different shape than the straight line you have. So this is called nodes. This is called vertices. A node is the start and the end. So now we moved here from a point. Each point has X and Y to a more sophisticated type of information, which we have here called lines. And then comes a polygon. Polygon are a bunch of lines that start and end in the same node. So here, if this is your nodes here, so here you go another node, and the end, we can create here what we call here a polygon. And it has to start and end on the same point. Each polygon consists of lines, and each line has some kind of nodes. Between them maybe some vertices to again change the shape. And this is the representation of what we call here vector data. The other way we do it is raster data. It's similar to your screen, your TV, your computer screen. It's a grid of pixels or smaller cells, and the cell pixel has a specific location attribute value, and that's what happened in your TV. Every cell or pixel has a different color and light, which at the end, when you sit back, you can see the picture. This is how the color and light works. If you get close to your TV, you're gonna find it's divided into small pixels or cells. Each one has a specific color and light, and this gives us what we call here the grid. Similar to any, even when we talked about Photoshop. Photoshop is how does it work. We have now any picture. Any picture consists of also some pixels, some cells. Each one has a specific color and light, and what PowerPoint does, or not PowerPoint, what Photoshop does is that it changes these colors, it changes these pixels to different color, and this is how you edit your picture. And every picture editing software does the same. When we add the filters, it adds just different colors to the pixels. This is how it works. Now they can move it as well. So this is what we call here a grid, and you notice here I even put it in this cylinder shape because these all together can contain a big cylinder, which we call here a geodatabase. We're going to talk about this by the end of this class today. So we have here, and the grid can also be divided into two things, something called a georelational and an object base. We're going to talk about this in detail in the next 15 minutes. Okay guys, so this is the different data models in brief. So let's just show you what I mean here. This is the real world. We have a lake, a stream, forest, agriculture, and urban. And I want to draw that. We have two ways to do it, like I told you. We have vector and raster. Let's figure out how to do it in vector. This is how it works in vector. We start here. Let's look here at, for example, the urban area. We define it as a small polygon, number 5 here. You can see here, number 5. And this is the 5th polygon. It has 4 points that just represented this house. You can see it's an abstract. And then we have a forest. Instead of putting it tree by tree, we're going to put it as one polygon. So if the polygon is a line that starts and ends in the same node, this is number 4, like you can see here. And you can see here to change the direction, these brown are vertices, except for the first and the last one, which is the same point. This is a node. So yellow is nodes and the browns are vertices. For the stream, we start from a yellow and end at the yellow, which are nodes, and then the stream changes direction. We try to represent and summarize how does it change the direction. So we added just 1, 2, and 3 vertices here. Same for the lake, number 3. And then we have number 1, which is the whole area. And we define this also as one polygon. So this is the one way to do it, is to represent everything you have either by points. Points can give you lines. Lines can give you polygons. That's one way to do it. The second way to do it, which is like your TV screen, like your Photoshop software, is to divide your area into grids. And every grid will take a number. Number 1 is for agriculture area. Number 2 is for a stream. You can see here the stream, instead of becoming a line, it became a bunch of points. And on Thursday, guys, we're going to have a really easy exercise of how to change between both. It's a nice drawing exercise. Number 3 here is the lake, and number 4 here is the forest. We just gave number to each cell. We put it in a database, and this database is the digital representation of raster model. Sorry guys. So this is how it works now again. So you have here the real world, and this is your model. Okay, let's imagine it's a map, a paper map. That's what we call here by an analog map. And now we want to put it in a GIS input. So we try to digitize this, put it in a digital way, and here we end up by this kind of different models, data models. We have lines for your roads. It has different attributes and some categories and some topologies and so on. So here we put it in some kind of a table, and we represent it like you can see here. The computer represents it digitally as 0 and 1s, which is the digital way of representing your model. And later on, I'm going to talk about the word digitizing. How can we come up with a paper map? And we ended up as a database with this table here with some polygons and lines and so on, and different representation for your information on your different representation for the data that you have. So, data models, we're going to learn something else, that we have what you call here objects, and the new trend now in GIS, something called like object-oriented programming. We had in any programming software. We also have an object representation of your data. So objects are simply abstract representations of reality. We store it in a database. We call it a spatial database. It's never perfect, so it's very imperfect representation. We try to subset all our characteristics. So here we have two types of data. We have spatial location, any location related to the data, and we have aspatial or non-spatial properties. So that's the real world. That's the human models of the real world. For example, here this is the buildings that you have, and you have here representation, and we represent it either in different ways. A spatial database, object in spatial database, and the relationships among them. So we say here, when we talked about relationships, I give you an example of the pizza place. When you want to find the origin destination, that's the relationship between these databases. So a spatial data model, we provide formal means of representing and manipulating spatially referenced information. It's the computer abstraction of the real world, and you can never is universally better than another. No model is better than another. We have tons of models out there. No one is better than the other. That's the real world. We try to digitize it, find the coordinates of different parts of it, and we try to put it in the computer. No model is a good representation of the real world. They try to perfect it, but still, no one is better than the other. The goal of you as a GIS professional here is to define objects that support the intended use at desired level of accuracy. So here we're talking, for example, for the pizza guy, he doesn't care if you have trees or not. He cares on the road and cares about the houses to be accurately put there. So different applications, different use. It has to be, we figure out what's the intended user, how can you serve him or her in the best way, and so what you need to model there. Now let's talk a little bit about coordinates. I know we'll talk in detail in the next 2 weeks about different coordinate systems, but I just want to tell you the meaning of word coordinates, because if you notice here when we talked about points, we talked about coordinates. So I'm just going to review very fast what are the different coordinates we use here in ArcGIS and in different GIS softwares and in the world. You might see this a lot. So coordinates here have defined spatial locations and extent of geographic location. Well, you know that it consists of pairs, triplets of numbers that specify the location in relation to the point of origin. So in any map, you're gonna find some point here, which we call here the 0, 0. Even in the globe, you're gonna find a point of origin. You have to have this point of origin. If you're talking 3D, then this will be the point of origin. So you create some axis, which is x and y, and every point here is located by the distance from this origin in these axes. So that's the most easy and the one that we use a lot, which is the Cartesian coordinates, that you have a point, you want to figure out where it's located. So here if you have 3-dimensional, so this is your x, this is your y, and finally this is your z. We have 3 coordinates or 2 coordinates, so it's sets of coordinates. So here when we want to represent, like you remember here the polygon here, we want to represent it using this coordinate system where we define here where this is my 0. So here you define every edge and every node, and you go around it like we did in our surveying class, when you wanted to find the different coordinates of your traverse, then you find the x and y for that. So expressed in one of many coordinate systems. In our class, we're going to learn a little bit about different coordinate systems, how to represent the Earth in different ways. And we use, for us to be drawing something like this and to have a paper representation of the real world, we need to do some kind of projection. Projection is, like you can see up there, this is the globe. How can we project it in a map? So we have to have some kind of projection. So we can have here our origin, and this origin we're going to have the x and y, so we can represent what's in the globe in the real map. So you can see here it's exactly like we had a paper around your Earth, your globe, your sphere, and then you spread it to have your map. This is called map projection. So for example, here this is the Earth. This is one of the projections we use. If you notice here, there is two lines, the x and y. You notice that the x-axis is the equator, which divides the Earth into North Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere, and the y-axis passes through Greenwich in UK. So this is we're gonna be talking in detail about this. We call it the prime meridian of the Earth, and you notice here the 0, 0 is this point here exactly in the middle. Sorry, here in the middle. And every point in the Earth you can now represent it by a set of x and y coordinates of the Earth. This is one way of representing the Earth. And then comes another very, very famous way to represent, and this is what you find in your GPS, geographic coordinate system. This is where there is no projection. It's like using the Earth. Yeah, this is a projected map, of course, because I want to show it in a two-dimensional map, but still you are dividing the Earth into, you can see here also the equator is one circle. Here it's a circle on the line because we're talking here about the Earth. And also around Greenwich, UK, we have what we call here a prime meridian. And now we divide the Earth into different angles, which define the longitude and the latitude of any point around the Earth. If you go to your GIS software on your phone, or you go to Google Earth, you're gonna find just on the lower part, you're gonna find numbers, big numbers that tell you exactly where you are in angles. So it's angles, and in today's Thursday exercise we will learn just how to go through different ways of defining angles. So this is another way of defining our location and coordinates around the Earth. The third way is also some kind of a representation or a projection that we use, something called the UTM zone numbers or UTM zone system. It comes from UTM stands for Universal Transverse Mercator. In our class this year, we will look a lot about how we do. Not this year, we do it a lot. When we have the Earth, we want to project this Earth into a piece of paper. We have different ways to do it. One way is to use something called a Universal Transverse Mercator, and then we divide the Earth into different zones. You can see here the zone. We give each zone a number, and every of these zones has its own coordinate system. So the example here, let's go here to our zone. Here is zone 17, West Virginia. So here we have, this is the zones, and we have also, we define this zone with different number and a letter, and within this zone we try to go here and we project the map, and we have our own local coordinate system inside this zone to define exactly where is the location of Beckley, which is a point here. We get the coordinates of this based on that zone. And this is another projection and another coordinate system that we'll be using in our labs in a few weeks ahead. So this is just a review, very fast review of coordinate system. We're going to go in details how to transfer between coordinate system and the math behind it. We're just today reviewing the different models and how do we use this coordinates into now representing the data. But before we do that, also we talked about something we did a lot in this class, because we're not just mapping or finding a location, we're adding some information and lots of information to it, which we call attribute data. It complements your coordinate data and reference to each object. So here you reference this to each object. We try to attach to every single object some other information. So let me give you an example here. This parcel here, I know exactly where it is. Every of these nodes, I know exactly what are the coordinates based on my coordinate system that we have here. And we attach to, and when you go to attribute table, the thing that we did last week in our lab gives me a table, and this table here this is my record, which is one of the rows. It tells me the name of this parcel, the area, the parameter, where is it, what does it have, any information I want to add to this parcel. It's in your attribute. It complements your coordinate data, and I'm going to tell you how we connect these two together and how do we have information about this parcel or this land. Or let's say we talk here about this this state or this county, and we attach to it some kind of weather information. So this is all called attribute data. We have three types of attribute data. We define, when we have attribute data, we can define it in different things. Something called nominal, and this is words. For example, here when we have here this fire hydrant, we can have different kinds of fire hydrant depending on its importance to the fire people. We have red, green, so that's called nominal, descriptive information. We type in information about it. Or we can say here something called ordinal. When we rank it, it's ranking here. Is it how many, for example here, high, low, medium, the importance for it. We can put some ranking, and ArcGIS helps us using different ways to input your, if you want to add a new attribute or new field of attributes to your set of stuff in your ArcGIS. You want to give it some kind of a rating or give it a name. A name is also some kind of a nominal or ordinal. Let's say big, small, mega, for example here. So any data, you just think about any type of data, and you can have something that you describe. You can have something that's ordinal to rank it, or you can have it number 3, something called interval or ratio. For example, area ranking, and ranking is high, low. So a number here is number of flanges for this fire hydrant. How many workers? So anything that has a number, we call it interval or ratio. So these are the different types of attribute data. And then comes the coordinate data, and we talked about the Cartesian. So here we have, usually when we have small areas like your surveying task and your surveying, we do it in 2-dimensional. But when the Earth comes into account here, sometimes we need a 3-dimensional for higher accuracy, and we take the Earth curvature into account. So here we have location of 2 or 3D space. It's either a pair or 3D, we use a triplet. We talked also about the spheric coordinate systems. It started very, very long ago, and we talked here about the longitude and latitude. So here we define something called the equator, longitude, latitude, and we talk about the meridian. We're going to talk about this in detail when we start the coordinate system class. And we also define different angles, and from the location we can also define the distance on the Earth. We're going to study this also in detail. We're going to do this example in class on Thursday, guys, when we have our angles. How can we change between different styles of angles? And that's so easy. I'm going to do a very fast example. You're experts in that, but I just wanted to review this again with you. And I'm going to stop here, guys, and the next video we're going to be talking about now how can we represent both the vector, and we're going to have another video for vector, and a second video for raster, or a second for vector, and third video for raster. And we're going to learn also how to differentiate between them and how to change between. You can see here, this is a vector, point lines and areas or polygons, and this is just some cells or pixels. How can we change between this one to that one and vice versa from this one to that one? So I'm going to stop here, guys. I'm going to start this slide in our next video. Have a great day and see you in the next video, and see you soon, guys.